Hey, what's up YouTube? Angry Eradicate here. Today, I'm not joined with anybody. I'm not with Slower the First or Hefty Haircross or anybody. I'm here by myself. We are starting a three-week journey into my Monotype tier list. Now, this is a disclaimer. These aren't like really an official thing. Even on Showdown, there's not an official tier list saying this type is the best type, this type is the second best type. There are some general statements about how Ice and Rock are pretty much considered the worst types, and then how Steel and Fairy are like pretty much considered the best types. Those are obviously in place, but there's some of the types in the middle that aren't necessarily so certain. And I want to go over my actual analysis of why I put each type in a certain spot. But obviously, this is going to be pretty controversial, I think, for people who are actually pretty serious about this stuff. So you'll probably disagree on at least more than one type, maybe almost all the types, but we'll see here. But the way I'm doing this, like I said, 3 videos, since there's 18 types, it's about 6 types per video. Low tier, mid tier, then high tier. I think, honestly, that you could argue that there wouldn't be 6, 6, and 6. You could argue 3 low types, and then like 12 mid-tier types, and then what, 3 top-tier types? There's plenty of different ways to argue. Like, you look at Smash 4's community, you look over in like with Zero's like tier list, he made it like middle tier is almost all the all the Smash characters, and like the low tier is only like 10 characters. So there's multiple ways to really make a tier list, but this is what the way mine's gonna be working here. So for our low tier types, we have Ice, Rock, Dragon, Ghost, Dark, and Bug. And before I begin on my analysis for these, let's go over what I'm actually analyzing. So I'll be going over obviously type matchups. While some might be pretty obvious, like you might think, okay, Steel has a lot of resist, so like a lot of those matchups are good for it. Not necessarily. To look at the individual Pokemon there, you have to look at like on like flying type teams. Flying type teams are pretty diverse. They don't have just all. They're not all necessarily weak to stuff. They have a lot of like ground types. So they're 4 times weak to ice, but then they also have the resist to electric. You have to look at things like that. There's other things that are important too, like what utilities do they have? Can this team run a viable weather team? Can this thing run Trick Room? Can this thing run... Like, what kind of other teams can they build against? Like, if you're a water type team, you're probably going to struggle against a lot of grass type teams. Can you build or like use any Pokemon that kind of help counter against the grass teams? Are like some matchups unwinnable? Then you have to also look at like an individual Pokemon on each team. Does this team have like 12 to 13 good people that you can use, or is it like only 7 to 8 Pokemon that you can choose from without getting to some like really niche use stuff? So we'll go over all that different stuff and whatnot. But up first, like I said, we have Ice, Rock, Dragon, Ghost, Dark, and Bug. That's kind of my order. And inside each individual tier list, it's kind of close. For the low tier, Ice and Rock are definitely the bottom 2. After that, I'd probably argue that maybe it goes Ghost, Dark, Bug, and then Dragon's probably like 6th worst. So we'll go over that one last. We'll go over these in order. I'll have it listed all down below. I'll have all my notes. I typed up a nice 6-page report. I went over each type's weaknesses, their strengths, some of the individual Pokemon. We talk about each of those. So I'll be down in the comment section, but down in the description below. So make sure you look at those. Let's start with Ice here, though. I think Ice and Rock. It's between those two with the lowest type. I think Ice gets slightly edged out by it. Just my personal opinion. Obviously, between the two of them, Rock has a decent advantage in the fact that it can kind of stop the hail with its own sandstorm ability, because that kind of cripples Ice. Ice really relies on its snow ability, but let's actually go into Ice in general. So I'm going to go over the weaknesses first for these types, because that's kind of like the major idea behind this, is that these types are bad because of their weaknesses. They have very few strengths and generally a lot of weaknesses, or their weaknesses are just too much for their strengths to overcome. Alright, so it's weak to a lot of common attacking types, such as Fire, Rock, and even Fighting. This is a pretty important deal. Even on teams that aren't Fire, Rock, and Fighting, they usually have some kind of coverage in this mode, and Ice, as it is not a very good defensive type, so you're going to be taking a lot of damage almost every single turn. It's also weak to Stealth Rocks, and only Avalugg is the viable spinner for Ice, and that thing is obviously super weak to special attacks, weak to a lot of common attacking types like the ones I mentioned before. Almost every team's going to have them, and he's also taking 25% HP when he switches in, so it's really risky to switch him in like without like letting him get a free switch out. So using like some kind of U-turn user, a slow U-turn user for Ice would be super helpful, but guess what? You don't have one. Alright, it also loses badly to common stronger types such as Steel and Fire. Steel and Fairy make up, I think, about like 30 to 40% of teams. I remember that on usage stats, something like that. I'll leave a link to the description below for the usage stat place I used. But another common type is Fire. Fire is used pretty often. So when you go into tournaments and you would bring an Ice type team, you're almost guaranteed to be fighting a Steel or Fire type matchup, which is almost impossible to win. Even if you spec to be running stuff like Walrein or Lapras, it's still not an easy win against Fire and Steel type teams. Up next, we have usually loses the Weather War. So if you're fighting teams that have weather, whether it be sun or sand, it's going to be a bad time because you rely on pretty much only Ninetails. Abamsnow is not a very good snow setter. I mean, it's a good snow setter, but Abamsnow without just setting up snow is kind of worthless. So just to bring up Pokemon just to set up snow is not that helpful. Like, at least Ninetails hits pretty hard. It has a decent bit of special bulk, has some good speed, and it has access to a Aurora Veil, which is its main niche use over abamsnow. And it's not a terrible typing in grass ice. Don't get me started on that. But the fact that you can only rely on one snow setter is very detrimental to a team, simply because if that one thing dies to a bad misplay, or if they're able to wear it down with stealth rock damage, you're in a bad spot. And a lot of sand teams will run two sand setters, whether it be Tyrants. Obviously Tyranitar's can be used, and then either Hippowdon or some other, I guess you could run Gigalith, and there's also like other sandstorm users that can do that as well. Look at Sun type teams, you're almost guaranteed to see Torkoal and Charizard Y both on the team. That gives you two Sunsetters compared to one, and obviously it's just a bad matchup type-wise as well. And obviously ground types can also utilize it, which Ice has a bit better time against, since its stab is super effective against most ground types. But even then, the Sandstorm Sweepers are usually able to beat through it. Look at Excadrill. It does great work against a lot of the Ice type. And then there's many ways to deal with the Slush Rush users, which obviously Ice bases its whole game around. It's based around setting up Snow, and then usually the Aurora Veil, and then having Excadrill either set up with a Sword Stance or use Choice Band and sweep through people's team. Protecting out the Storm. So you can protect out Hail, because it's either going to last 5 or 8 turns. Killing their only Snow Setter, which happens pretty often with Stealth Rock damage, and the fact that they keep sending it back out. And if you kill it early enough, you only get one chance to sweep with it. Trick Room, which is viable only on a few types, so that works on like Ghost type teams and whatnot. And then Substalling with Prankster users and then other weather teams. So like most types will have at least a decent way of dealing with it. You have to be careful against it. It's obviously something that you have to worry about, but it's not like you have to. It's not gonna, like, if you're playing careful enough, it's not the end of the world. And when Gen 7 first came out with this, it was a pretty viable strategy. People weren't used to dealing with it yet, but now people aren't as worried about it, aren't as paranoid. They figured out some strategies to work against it. Strengths, there's actually quite a few strengths for Ice type. The thing is, with a lot of the lower tier types, they don't have a lot of strengths, so they aren't that good. The problem with Ice is that it has a lot of like bad weaknesses to its actual team. But for the strengths here, Hail works great with like many Ice types with 100% accuracy for Blizzards. You look at stuff like Kyurem Black running the mix sets. You don't have to run Ice Beam. You can run Blizzard. That's going to net you a lot more easier KOs. Even like Alolan Ninetails, if it didn't have the 100% accuracy for Blizzard, it would probably be running Ice Beam and not getting nearly as much damage off. There's other sweepers like Rotom Fridge, which isn't used as much, but it helps for a lot of Ice types. And then obviously Slush Rush is the major factor here for this type. Slush Rush, Excadrill, Sandslash, Alolan Sandslash, or Slush Rush Beartic are super threatening. And like I said, you kind of have to have one of those options left to beat it. If you don't, it's basically game. They'll usually use them a little bit later in the game once they have your stuff worn down a little bit. They get those guaranteed one-hit KOs, because especially with Alolan Sandslash, he's not that strong. Beartic's pretty strong, and he has access. They both have access to Sword Stance, but I think Beartic's typing is a little bit better, because Steel doesn't really help out Sandslash that much, in my opinion. And Mamoswine and Kyurem Black are very strong and almost always perform strongly. Kyurem Black's a great wall breaker, can also be a good revenge killer with the Choice Scarf, and Mamoswine can run a plethora of sets, whether it be Stealth Rock's Suicide Setter, good wall breaker, or it can even be a revenge killer with Ice Shard. And Ice is a pretty good attacking type, so it definitely works really well for it there. But up next, guys, we have the Rock type. This is pretty much guaranteed one of the bottom 2 spots. It's just super weak. You look at it, we'll go over the weaknesses first again here. Very poor defensive typing. I'd argue that it's the worst typing in the game for defense. Being weak to Grass, Water, Fighting, Ground, and Steel, that's going to force you to sack off a lot in the fights, especially since your special defense, almost every single Rock type is super low. That's not going to give you a lot of options to play on the defensive side. You pretty much have to go bulky offensive or hyper offensive with Rock, and that really struggles for it, because look at how slow Rock types are as well. It really leaves you kind of like forced to take hits, unless you can't really run Trick Room on any like viable Rock type. So you're really kind of stuck playing offense, but you don't really have the speed to do it. You're going to be taking a lot of hits. You look at the speed, like I say here, you can check if you're reading my notes, like along with me here, which I recommend you to do. I kind of go over all the notes I'll be going over here. But outside of Choice Scarf, Nihilego, and Mega Aerodactyl, Rock doesn't have any speed options. You can run some Choice Scarf stuff, but even that, like a lot of times, isn't going to be fast enough. And again, like you'll be taking hits, and you don't want to be taking hits, because almost every type's going to have super effective coverage against you, and it's just going to sweep through most of your team. And then Rock also doesn't have very many choices for its team. Tyranitar, Terrakion, Nihilego, Shuckle, and Cradily are basically guaranteed spots on your team. That leaves you one spot to build your team with. That leaves you really predictable. When they see a Rock type team, if they have any experience against Rocks at all, they're going to know how to play against your team. You make sure Nihilego doesn't get a chance to set up, and you're pretty much good, and don't switch out too much for Stealth Rock damage. Kill Tyranitar early in case you have some kind of like Sand Sweeper, but it really doesn't have any of those that many. It doesn't have that many Sand Sweepers. When standing up Sand with Tyranitar, obviously you get the special defense boost, but it's already pretty low, so it's not that helpful. But there's not really anybody with Sand Rush to take advantage of it. You look at ground types, they have stuff with Sand Veil, which isn't really, I don't think you can use Sand Veil, but it has Sand Force users such as like Mega Garchomp, and then Excadrill has access to Sand Rush, which makes it a viable sweeper. And you look at a lot of Rock's type matchups. Rock only has a positive record matchup against Fire with a 66% win rate, which is pretty good because, you know, Fire is a pretty common type. But against types like Flying and Normal, Rock only wins about 55% of the time. Now, this was taken a few months ago. It might have all changed by now, but against types that should be winning a lot more against, 55% of the win time is not that good for types that you should be good against. And this type does not have very many strengths that it can rely on. It's kind of like a generic type. Like, you look at stuff like Golem, like, they aren't that good of Pokemon. Look at like stuff like Terrakion and Heligo. Sure, they're pretty good Pokemon, but they all have flaws that you can take advantage of. But let's go over some strengths now for Rock. Terrakion and Heligo are both strong sweepers that can dominate and sweep through teams. Whether you run Terrakion as a Choice Band or Choice Scarf, it's going to accelerate. I recommend running Choice Band on that and then Choice Scarf on the Heligo. That's going to make your team super strong. Terrakion on the Wall Break. And late game, the Heligo, if it gets a chance to get a KO, it's going to be great. You can sweep through teams. Problem is, if they have like a chance or something, it's just going to wall it out and then you guess you can't toxic it, but you can like Seismic toss it down. Shuckle can set up many different hazards that trainers can choose from and use Red Card to stop setup sweepers. Shuckle can set up Stealth Rock, Spikes, Tox Spikes, and Sticky Web, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But the fact that you don't know which one he's going to be setting up can be pretty detrimental. And there's not all types have ways to deal with like bouncing back. Like obviously Ghost and Dark have Mega Sableye, and there's plenty of taunt users on many teams, but not on all of them. So setting up with stuff like this is pretty important for Rock, especially since with your sweepers with Terrakion and the Heligo, it helps them net their KOs a lot easier. Tyranitar can function either as a wall breaker, special defensive wall with Sandstorm, or set up with Dragon Dance, or a combination of these roles, you know. But Tyranitar is also pretty strong. And then Sandstorm is strong as it helps boost most Rock types' abysmal special defense. Again, it doesn't help too much, but you know, any bit helps. It can help save you. If it saves you from like an extra kill, or actually like hit the kill, that helps, man. But there aren't that many abilities, like I said earlier. Lacks Excadrill or Mega Garchomp, which loves the sand. Alright, up next we have Ghost. I actually made a Ghost type team not too long ago. I made most of these types. I think Ice and Rock were some of the first types that I made. I actually like my Rock team a lot, but I still don't think it was necessarily like a top 3 team for me. But for Ghost here, some of the weaknesses I have down: shallow team. It's forced to run Gengar, Mega Sableye, Mimikyu, and Alolan Marowak. It loves to run Jellicent. And that only leaves you with one other option, and it kind of lacks a superstar of the team. Like if you look at other types, like Nihilego is going to be able to sweep through a lot of teams. This Choice Scarf set is super scary. You look at stuff like Mimikyu, sure, it's pretty good that it's able to set up with that busted form, but it's kind of getting figured out a bit more. A lot of stuff beats it now. Choice Scarf Gengar isn't as threatening as it used to be in past metagames or past gens. And even with Choice Scarf, Chandelure isn't that fast, so it kind of lacks a lot of options. When they banned Marshadow and Aegislash back a while, obviously Aegislash was back a while ago, that really hurt the viability of Ghost. If it had access to Aegislash and Marshadow, Ghost would actually be a pretty strong type. Again, weak core, Mega Sableye is a great annoyer and can cripple a lot of sweepers, especially physical ones. But most types have a mon that can break through his weak defensive stats and HP. His HP stats like what, 50 or 60? I don't care how high your special defense stats are, your defensive stats are, unless you're Shuckle. Shuckle can pull it off. And Jellicent and Confagus aren't bad walls, but they can't really handle a lot of the offensive pressure that a lot of types can push out. Remember, Monotype is a very offensive metagame, because if you have a bad matchup type-wise, they're going to be able to break you down very easily. So teams often rely on their offensive mons, because even if you have a bad matchup, they might have coverage moves that can still cover for it. If you have a bad type matchup, it doesn't really matter how good your walls are. Their super effective hits are going to do a lot of damage to your team. But as always, Ghost does have some strengths. It can run Trick Room to kind of make up for its lacking speed. Even with stuff like Gengar, outside of that, doesn't have a very good speed option. So if you don't run Gengar, which is a bad idea, but if you just don't use it while Trick Room's up, this team can actually be pretty scary. But because a lot of teams will run on like offense and faster mons. This allows Ghost types to take advantage of these teams that usually run frail but fast Pokemon. And Mimikyu, when saved for the right moment, can be a good win condition, but getting to that can be a little bit hard. People are figuring it out. They're not going for Draco Meteors to let you send out Mimikyu to take advantage of the fact that you're at like half special attack. Like if you're fighting a dragon type team, Latios isn't going to Draco Meteor in the middle of nowhere to give your Mimikyu a free chance to set up, especially when Dragon doesn't have that much it can deal with Mimikyu. But yeah, that's most of my strengths for Ghost. It doesn't have. It's not the end of the world with some of its weaknesses. It can't. I feel like the problem with Ghost is it looks great on paper. You see some of the Pokemon like Mimikyu, Gengar, Mega Sableye. Hey, these mons are great. But they don't really work too well together. Like I said, the core falls apart, and if you can't keep up with the offensive pressure, a lot of there's types that do what it can do good better. You look at types like Electric, it can just put off so much more offensive potential, even though they're both pretty bad defensively. Electric's just better at pushing out offense. It has issues like that. But it does have a few nice trick niche uses. It's good against Psychic, which is like one of the better types, so you know, it has some advantages. All right, up next we have Dark. Some of its bad matchups include besides Psychic, it doesn't offer much of an important matchup advantage. It outright loses to Fairy. Steel's about even or even a slight loss. It's usually able to wall out most of what Dark can do, and Steel's obviously usually defensive or balanced, and it kind of just does the defensive side better than Dark, and then Dark's offense is not enough to carry through it. Mega Lopunny pretty much, so for normal and fighting type teams, Mega Lopunny beats everything bar Choice Scarf Hydreigon or Choice Scarf Greninja. Alolan Muck, I'm not sure how much it tanks if it's a defensive set, but what's it going to do back to Lopunny? Try to poison it? And a lot of normal type teams will run Cleric support, so that's not going to be an option. And Wish support on like Chansey, it's going to almost full heal Mega Lopunny. So that's a lost matchup right there, on top of Steel being a bad matchup and Fairy. So you're already at a loss there. Fighting type and Fairy absolutely destroy this team, like I said. It makes it impossible to play this type in tournaments, especially with Fairy, and because fighting's not as common as it used to be last gen, but you know, it is what it is. Tyranitar Sandstream does not really benefit anyone on Dark at all, and it can end up actually hurting you more than the most, because if you're running something like Focus Sash Greninja, probably isn't going to happen, but it's actually going to hurt you more than anything else. Other like things like Leftovers, or like Mega Sableye doesn't have recovery, so having that out in the Sandstorm, it doesn't have Leftovers for recovery, so having that out in Sandstorm is not going to be very helpful for you. And no one gets to totally take advantage of the bonus special defense. There's not really any other rock dark types that are viable, at least. And some of its strengths, it does function really well as a balanced team, build around Hydreigon, Greninja, and other sweepers such as like Sharpedo or Bisharp. That does have like another good thing for it. It has some nice variety in its members. It's not only running one set, which is pretty nice, but then it doesn't really help you build around too much else. That's the problem. Looking at its bad matchups, Bisharp and Sharpedo don't really help against any of the types that it already loses against. And then Alolan Muck, Tyranitar, and Manabuzz do form a pretty good defensive core. It's not as good as like some of the Steel cores and whatnot, but that's what Steel's meant to do. Steel is the definition of a defensive team, but this team does it pretty well as well. I'm going a little bit faster with some of these other types, but I guess I'm just getting more into the video, so I don't really know. But up next we have Bug. Some of its weaknesses: Stealth Rocks kills this team. Obviously, being an offensive type makes it pretty hard to get back to your Rapid Spinner, because your only viable Rapid Spinner user is Fortress. And most of your team is taking at least 25%. Obviously, stuff like Buzzwole will only take 12.5 because fighting resists rock. But stuff like Mega Pinsir, Volcarona, and even the occasional Yanmega will be taking half their HP just entering the battle. If they switch in and they just they don't defog. If they just whirlwind you out, that thing's dead. That's game. You lost one of your sweepers. The team has no real core either. Fortress and Shuckle can tank a hit, but both have no recovery. There are no other real walls besides maybe a defensive set for Scizor. You look at their team, like even like stuff like Crustle, sure it can take a hit, but again, it doesn't have reliable recovery. Lacking a real core like this makes this team really not gimmicky, but you really have to have your predictions on point early game to get your setup sweeper to work, because they do rely on a lot of setup sweepers. Like my brother's bug type team, I think it ran like 4 things with setup moves, and that also helps, which we'll go over more in the strengths, and the fact that they have so many diverse sweepers, but it is what it is. Matchup wise, Bug also struggles against most of the top types, such as Steel, which it can wall it out pretty easily, and most of those sweepers can't do much against Steel. Fairy, which it struggles to get going against, and Fire, which is just a terrible matchup. Those 3 types make up 30 to 40% of teams. You'll be fighting, I guarantee you, if you go through a tournament, you'll fight at least 3, out of the 6 rounds usually in tournaments, you'll be fighting at least 2 or 3 of those teams will be Fire, Steel, and Fairy. It's just such a hard matchup to win. To win one of them, okay, you're going to rely on having some kind of hacks or luck, because it's just not going to happen in a fair matchup. And then up next, we have some strengths for it. Diverse cast of sweepers from Yanmega to Mega Scizor, from Crustle to Galvantula. Bug is the most diverse offensive type, simply because it has so many different setup sweepers. I can give you like a whole list of like 12 mons, and this helps it build against this helps it build against a few of the types. You can run, let's see here, obviously Volcarona is almost always used, but that kind of helps you against Steel. It gives you at least one thing that's going to be good against it. Against some of the more the fire type teams, you can run like Arachnid. There's like other sweepers. You can pick the sweepers that'll help you counter against other matchups. If you know, I don't know how you would know, but if like your friend's running like a fire type team, run Arachnid, run Armaldo. Pick up the matchups, you know, but it's so hard to do on ladder. It's just not a viable thing you can do. And hyper offensive. Bug has many setup sweepers and just powerhouses that can either dominate a game from early on or clutch late game and finish off a team. That's the nice thing about Bug. Even if you're down by a good bit, if you found an opening to like set up with your Scizor, to set up with your Pinsir, to set up with anybody on Bug, really, Volcarona, there's so many different setup sweepers like I've been saying for this whole segment. But it gives you a chance to come back into the game, even if you make some bad plays early on. Bug's a pretty easy type. You will lose to some of the top tier types, but for what it can do, you can learn pretty easily. So it's a pretty good beginner type. And then for our last low tier type, we have Dragon. This is the controversial one here. I probably should have mentioned this earlier. Probably lost a few viewers from this late on when I made that when I stated that Dragon's on it. It's pretty controversial. A lot of people like Dragon as an offensive type. Has a lot of good, like, obviously it's a pretty good defensive typing. Doesn't have that many good defensive walls though. Let's go over some weaknesses now though. So it's terrible against the two best types that are super common in Fairy and Steel. I've literally talked to some people. Fairy is unwinnable. If you spec in the Dragall, if you spec into other things that can kind of like wall out against Fairy, or like mostly Dragall, even with that, it's not going to be good enough against Fairy to win. And people say don't even bother specking the only fight Fairy with like EV spreads to make sure certain things don't kill. Because unless you have some insane prediction or hacks, you're not going to win that fight. Steel also performs really well as they can generally wall out the hyper-offensive Dragon nature, and they can't really spam Draco Meteors like before. And obviously Steel was pretty good against that. Back in Gen 5 when Dragon ran rampant, Steel was actually able to, it was like one of the few types that really had like a good chance of winning against Dragon. And like I said earlier, Dragon relies heavily on offense, even as their best walls in Goodra and Dragall don't really have access to recovery. Dragon like Psychic generally wants to win their fights quickly, and if you don't, the team will kind of struggle as they will slowly get whittled down until the opponent's team, Choice Scarf user, can just kind of sweep through their team and beat them. Like other types down near the bottom of my type list, Dragon does not have much diversity in their teams. Bug's the only really type down here that has that much diversity. You'll see in some other types, like Water, super diverse type. Even like Grass has like 10 good options. But these types down here that kind of rely on like the same 5 or 6 Pokemon. That's a lot of types have like they're like 3 or 4 S tier Pokemon that you have to use, but it's the actual other options they can run. Garchomp, Dragonite, Latios, Hydreigon are all musts on a team in my opinion, and if a team generally picks one of Goodra or Dragall, leaving you one option for the last thing. Dragon relies a lot on Choice Scarf items and choice items in general, like Choice Scarf, Choice Bands, Choice Specs. I've seen teams run all 3, like Choice Scarf Latios, Choice Specs Hydreigon, Choice Band Dragonite. And if you make a bad play early on, that can really cost you in a game, especially against types like Fairy, which is already a pretty bad matchup. But even like other types that like have a lot of setup sweepers like Bug, if you make a bad play early on, they get a chance to set up. That can end the fight really quickly against you, because if when your speed controls go down like Latios, you don't have a phaser to take care of them. None of your team, unless you run like some really weird, some really wonky Rest Talk Salamence set with Roar and Dragon Tail, you're not gonna be able to phase anybody, and they get a free chance to set up, and that's game, because your type's just not defensive enough to deal with a setup sweeper. So you can guess right though and have a path to victory, but one mess up can end the match. That's what I have written down for that. Some of their strengths here, a lot of good matchups against other lower tier types and mid tier types, in some top tier types as well. It's a really good defensive type, but it does struggle against some of the top types. It does have good matchups against Electric, Bug, Ghost, Poison, Grass, and Fire. They're not like super huge wins, like 65% plus, but it's like 55 to 60% win rate there. So it gives you a slight advantage in that, but again, it relies a lot on prediction with your moves. While Dragon's nearly unbeatable in Gen 5 with Draco Meteor spam, it kind of struggles. It's still pretty strong now. It did get it kind of got nerfed, I'm not going to lie, just in the fact that other types got better against it. Fairy was a direct result in countering it. But Choice Scarf, Hydreigon, and Latios, Kyurem Black, and Choice Bands, Dragonite can really break about any core, besides maybe Steel and Fairy, which is a prediction or two. If you get that one predict and they switch into like their Heatran, and they thought you would go for like Draco Meteor, but you go for the Earth Power, and its Hair Balloons popped, that can change a game in your favor. It's like really prediction reliant. If you're really good at predicting, I guess there's always like, it's not so much skill, but if you kind of like can get in their head a little bit and read what they're gonna do and get the nice predict, that'll win you the fight, you know. But that's all I really have for Dragon. So let me know what you guys think about this tier list here. Obviously, the next one will be coming out next week. We have our mid-tier types. I'll be looking forward to putting that out, discussing this with you guys as always. But let me know what your tier lists are. And then obviously you complain and yell at me when you don't agree with dragon being down here or bug being down here. If you argue ice and rock not belonging down here, though, I'm gonna kick you from the channel. You don't belong here anymore then. But thank you guys so much for watching this as always. Check out the rest of my channel. I have plenty of content. If you like this, trust me, you'll like the rest of it. But thank you guys so much for watching as always. We hope to catch you in the next video.